Hi everyone, my name is LZ Henshewit, and I've been asked to give you a guest lecture on how the concept of community is perceived around the world. As a brief outline, I have jotted down a few lesson objectives. First of all, we'll just look at a brief introduction to key definitions and concepts. Then we'll look at a variety of views on the concept of community across the world, primarily grouped into Eastern concepts of community, Western concepts, and then African concepts of community beyond just South Africa. Then we'll reflect on how these perspectives are influencing current global issues. And then lastly, I'll give you a set of guiding questions for your reflection and a small design exercise. As an English language word, community can refer to a social unit as well as an ecological unit. Our focus will be on the social unit today. Wikipedia offers a concise description of what a social community is, which is basically a group of living things with a commonality, such as norms, religious values, customs, or identity. And when we expand commonality a bit more, it refers to human communities that may have intent, belief, resources, preferences, needs, and risks in common, affecting the identity of the participants and their degree of cohesiveness. During the lecture on community in South Africa, Discourse 1, Neil Leroux explains that we navigate our world around who we are and what we believe. He explains that history gives you your identity gives you your beliefs, and people with shared beliefs form communities. I would like to go one step further to note that the community and its sense of community also affects your identity. Identity and community are therefore not mutually exclusive. In fact, this is the essence of communitarianism, which is a philosophy that emphasizes the connection between the individual and the community. Its overriding stance is based upon the belief that a person's social identity and personality are largely molded by community relationships. As mentioned, there are a number of aspects or commonalities around which communities can form. Here I've just listed a few of them. Some are very self-explanatory, others probably not. For example, resources. A community can form around a natural resource, for example, a river. So a farming community can form around a shared resource, such as a river. Communities can form around your shopping preferences, your food preferences, your hobbies, your sport. It can form around risks as well. Natural disasters can often create displacement communities that would then have to face this risk together. Geisfeld distinguishes between two major uses for the term community. First is the territorial and geographic notion of community. So communities of place, where space plays a role, these groups either share a certain geographical area, which is a country, a village, a town, etc., or the common shared element is understood geographically or spatially. This is also known as locality, which has led to rich literature in the field of community studies and locality studies. For example, the land that a tribe, which is a customary community, occupies is fundamental to the tribe's very existence and its sense of community. So that community is tied to the land. The second notion is relational, which concerns the character of human relationships without the reference to location. Again, these two are not mutually exclusive, as one can be part of a neighborhood, which is a community of place, but not experience a great sense of community with the people around you. The third and most prominent during the COVID-19 pandemic is the virtual community. These communities are mostly based on relationships or relations, but can have a shared spatial focus. Lee and Newby note that when people are asked what community means to them, they often cite their closest social networks. In this light, a community is none other than a social system. So in social sciences, systems and human systems are studied through fields called systems thinking or complexity thinking. And the key premise of complexity or social systems thinking is that a social system, such as the community, and the interactions between the individual parts, which is the people, produce emergent qualities that would not be present within the parts alone. Such emergent qualities can include a sense of belonging or a sense of community or emotional support. So what this means is that if you have 5 individuals, within each individual, the abstract notion or feeling of sense of belonging does not necessarily exist. But put the 5 together in a close-knit community, they experience as a collective that sense of community. So the whole is thus greater than the sum of its parts. Sense of community is a concept used in a variety of social science disciplines, which concentrates on what people feel or encounter whilst part of a community, rather than dwell on the structure or the format or the organization of the community. So this brings me to another key concept, which is the obviously sense of community. So Macmillan and Chavies have delved into this concept and established that a sense of community depends on 4 crucial elements, which is membership. So it's the feeling that one has that you are invested, a part of yourself in this community, and therefore you have a right to belong. Okay, so you're a member. Then it's influence, whereas individual members have some influence over the group and vice versa. The third aspect is integration and in fulfillment of needs. And here it's important to know that people do what serves their needs. So the sense of community will be stronger if an individual feels that their needs have been met. And the last aspect is there needs to be a shared emotional connection for there to be a strong sense of community. And this is based on a shared history. And in order to share it, it's not necessary for the members to all have lived that history, but merely to identify it. Okay, so a sense of community is thus a feeling that members have of belonging, a feeling that members matter to one another and to the group, and a shared faith that members' needs will be met through their commitment to each other. Many argue that William Morris, a 19th century British poet, artist, novelist, and staunch socialist, saw fellowship in the same light as what we perceive a sense of community to be today, when he said the following in 1886: "Fellowship is heaven, and lack of fellowship is hell. Fellowship is life, and lack of fellowship is death. And the deeds that you do upon the earth is for the fellowship's sake you do them." We now move on to the next section, where we're going to look at global cultures at a broader scale to shine a light on how the concept of community is perceived across the different regions of the world. In cross-cultural studies, researchers often distinguish between individualistic and collectivist cultures or societies, or in other words, individualism or collectivism. And when we look at collectivism, it's the experience of being a member of a specific group in which group values transcend those of the individual. It's a situation in which people feel they belong to the larger collectives which care for them in exchange for loyalty and vice versa. Traditionally, societies that is more collectivist, we can find them in Eastern and traditional African societies. On the other hand, individualism is a philosophy in which the values of the individual transcend those of the group. People are concerned with themselves and close family members only. This is mostly in Western societies. You might wonder why research on these differences between societies are important. So Louis Dumont provides an answer when noting that these differences between societies are also relevant for differences between individuals, because they influence even the most personal relations such as love, intimacy, marriage, and the breakup of relations. So being aware of these cultural differences is also key when considering one's own personal self-orientation, so whether you are more individualistic or collectivist, and how that would play out in a community setting. The seminal theory by Marcus and Kitayama, developed in 1999 on culture and the self, has had a major impact on social, personality, and developmental psychology, in proposing that people in different parts of the world tend to think of themselves in two fundamental different ways, which is either collectivist or individualist. So this theory pretty much divided the world into two groups. So to look at this, the we culture or collectivist culture focuses on the interdependent self. So there's a connection to others, and you adjust yourself to the expectation of the group, and you understand your place in the broader society. The collectivist self stresses commonality and defines oneself via its place, role, loyalties, and duties. Tend to see things in context. People identify with and care for their communities. They value a sense of belonging. There's emotional dependence on the group. And you work for the benefit of the group. So there's less focus on personal privacy. And it's a political theory associated with communism. On the other hand, individualism, it focuses on the independent self. So you are independent from others. You're separate from the social context. You choose your own way, and standing out are ways of being a good person. You value personal opinion, your private own personal opinion. You stress uniqueness. You define oneself by inherent attributes, so by your own traits, abilities, values, and preferences. Tend to see things in isolation, and you work for the benefit of the self. Individualists value personal success over the achievement of the group, and it is a political theory associated with democracy and capitalism. Chang Liu, a Chinese illustrator who was born and raised in Beijing, moved to Berlin at the age of 13. So after living in Germany for 13 years, which is a more individualistic or westernized society, Liu began working on a project to document the differences between Eastern and Western culture. And these are just fun pictograms. For example, the red and the blue, Western civilization presents the blue view, and red than the Eastern perspective. And this is how the two sees authority and how individuality is perceived between the two. How the West tend to deal with problems is to face it straight on or head on. And where Liu perceives the Eastern stance to be more avoidance. Queuing. I've never seen people queue like that. On the right. How to deal with anger. Interestingly enough, I actually, it took me a while to see the difference in this picture. And the only little difference is that the Eastern perspective, although there's anger inside, internal anger is not externalized. There's still a smile on the person's face. And again, self-portrayal is also really interesting. Whereas a member of the Western view or a more individualistic person might portray himself more than what he thinks he is, and vice versa on the Eastern side.
The A to Z of isms. Individualism. If someone called you an individualist, would you be flattered or insulted? An individualist might be a rugged John Wayne, a pioneer like Amy Johnson, a creative innovator like Kate Bush, or an entrepreneur like Richard Branson. People we admire for refusing to follow the crowd, for being true to themselves. But individualism is also often said to be the source of Western civilization's degeneracy, accused of leading to selfishness, shallow consumerism, the breakdown of society. Individualism is a double-edged sword. Many believe its Western roots go right back to early Christianity. Jesus taught that salvation did not depend on what tribe you belonged to, but on how you chose to live your life. God had a one-to-one relationship with people, not to groups. The 16th century Protestant Reformation took this further, taking away the need for priests to act as intermediaries between God and ordinary people. This sowed the seeds for the flowering of the modern individual in the 18th century Enlightenment. The Prussian philosopher Kant summed up its key message in the Latin phrase sapere aude, dare to know, to think for yourself. Personal autonomy became the central value of Western society. We see this in the principles of one person, one vote, civil liberties, and equal rights for all. But this in many ways welcome development has gone hand in hand with the decline of community. The growth of independence and autonomy leads to a decline in interdependence and solidarity. In other cultures, these communal values have traditionally taken precedence. Across East Asia, who you are cannot be separated from the groups you belong to. That does not mean you lose your identity in the crowd. You find your identity in it as a parent, a child, a ruler, a teacher, an apprentice. When we can all be different and yet all come together, we have harmony, the highest value in Confucian philosophy. Across the world, individualism is lamented when it turns us into atomized units, cut off from each other, showing little or no interest in our fellow citizens. But if you can be yourself while also being part of society, contributing to it, your individualism will be praised and celebrated.
Right, I thought that was just a great little clip summarizing it. So now let's look at how do countries compare. Geert Hofstede has done very extensive research on how an individual's culture influences values in the work environment. He's collected data across 70 countries, and he's developed a robust model for measuring national cultures. And his model has got 6 dimensions, but one of them, which I'm interested in for today's lecture, is this aspect of individualism versus collectivism. And his data has shown that collectivist cultures are typically East Asian, Middle Eastern, or Arabian countries such as China, Hong Kong, India, Japan, Pakistan, and Taiwan. And typically, individualistic cultures can be found in Northern America and European countries such as Australia, Great Britain, Canada, and the US. But a more nuanced country comparison is presented in this map here that shows more individualistic countries in a darker purple and less individualistic countries in lighter purple, so more collectivist. So you can see it is not as clear-cut as East versus West. So when you delve into his data a bit more and you start comparing individual countries across regions, it is quite interesting to see the differences. So, for example, here on the left, I've done a comparison between Ghana, South Africa, South Korea, and the United Kingdom. And this aspect here is individualism, or the score for individualism. So according to his data is that the United Kingdom is more individualistic than, for example, Ghana or South Korea, which is true to his theory. But when we look at countries such as Greece, Portugal, Spain, and Japan, so 3 European countries and 1 Eastern country, their scores, the individualistic scores, are pretty much the same across the board. But also interesting, Japan scores higher, so is seen more individualistic than a country such as Portugal, which is also westernized. Okay, so having said all of that, a group of researchers recently questioned this common tendency to understand culture in terms of binary opposites that differentiate between Western cultures and other cultures, or West versus the rest. Vignolius et al., they argue that independence and interdependence as self-constructs are not necessarily opposites, as most individuals, even in the most industrious societies, lead their lives within an inherited set of relations or community. So they've gone back to the original work from Marcus and Katayama, which we've also touched on earlier, and they try to expose how people across the world view themselves, and then how those identities then shape communities. They've done a massive longitudinal study across 16 countries initially, and then they delved into more cultural groups within these countries, and more than 10,000 people participated in the study. And this led to a more nuanced theoretical model denoting a set of choices for the individual to determine whether one would think, act, or feel more independent or more interdependent across a set of personal social settings. So at this point in the study, the authors concluded that differentiating between independent and interdependent ways of seeing oneself is not enough to denote the richness of diversity that exists in the way we see ourselves across global cultural groups. The study shows how this original differentiation between East and West is only partly true, but it fails to capture the complexity across the globe, and it notes, depending on prevailing values and beliefs, socioeconomic development, and religious heritage, societies promote different ways of being independent and of being interdependent. So they make some regional conclusions which might be contradictory to the initial work by others, whereas to suggest that Middle Eastern data shows a reliance on the self as well as an openness to bond with others. So there's a bit of both. Self-interest was highest in data from the poorest nations, whereas commitment to others was highest in rich Western nations. This may seem surprising, but they note that the African forms of independence are ways of adapting to challenging living environments. So being an independent self in a poor setting doesn't necessarily mean that, or you're only doing that because you are trying to survive. And then they also note that religion plays a huge role in how the self and your relationship with others are defined. For example, Catholic data stresses differences and self-expression, whereas Muslim data show importance of similarity and harmony. So from this study, from what Vignolius et al. Concluded, we see that religion is important, very important in defining what it means to be a person, especially with others, and how to be a community member. Although religion, or the lack thereof, is not the only aspect that determine how different communities are viewed across the world, I thought it would be a good starting point for the discussion, especially given the sheer numbers of people belonging to these faith-based global communities. So this is a map to show it's a world map showing how the distribution of religions across the world. You'll see the blue is Christianity, mostly in the West, Europe, and parts of Africa, and then the Islam faith, mostly concentrating Middle East and Northern Africa, and then Hinduism and Buddhism and others in the East. Okay. So we'll quickly look at different religions in these three areas, global regions, which is Africa, the East and the West, and trying to derive their views on community along religious faith-based lines. So the first one we'll look at from the Eastern perspective is Confucianism, and it is best understood as an ethical guide to life and living with strong character, strong morals. It's a very old belief system or Chinese ideology that is still the cornerstone of Chinese culture today. It stresses moral values, so your own respect, humility, obligation to others in individuals, which then influences the world around you. Rituals such as ancestor worship are used to strengthen these ethics and create a sense of community. And family is seen as a vital social group within the society. And this is Confucius here on the right, and he believed that you do not do unto others what you would not want others to do unto you. There's just ancestor honoring in China. Taoism is another Chinese religion based on a spiritual connection with nature, and is based on the teachings of Lao Tzu. And the biggest premise is to live harmoniously with the world and universe. The philosophy is more about becoming a good person than doing good things, and being virtuous as an individual will make the world a better place. And this is how you will then influence your community. Buddhism is a very popular religion in India, and is the third most prominent religion in ancient China as well. It was founded by Siddhartha Gautama, which is the original Buddha, who lived in India around the 6th century. Buddhism is a philosophy that stresses personal development and the ability to develop deep knowledge, so through meditation, spiritual learning, and practice. It recognizing the interdependence and transient nature of all things. So the key to happiness is to not desire or crave anything, as they believe that this only brings suffering. Buddhism also teaches that our survival depends on one another, so there's a deep interconnected community. And Buddhism is sometimes accused of being individualistic, but it is rather a collectivist religion, as self is seen as one with social relations, the universe, and nature. And the last of the Eastern religions that I'll briefly touch on is Hinduism. This is the third largest religion in the world and is mostly concentrated in India. And it closely relates to Buddhism in that your actions and thoughts determine your present and future. They also live along a very strong moral code, and they believe that all living creatures are sacred. Community is key, absolute key to this belief as well, and there's a big focus on respect for elders and the family unit. And the sense of community is maintained through cyclic festivals that require the entire community to partake. And when we look at Western perspectives, there's really only two big religious groups that I would like to touch on, which is Christianity and then something called irreligion, which I'll get to. So Christianity is the world's largest religion with 2.3 billion followers. They believe in God. There are four key groups, which is the Catholic Church, the Protestant groups, Eastern Orthodox churches, and Oriental Orthodox churches. Christianity is practically synonymous with the Western culture, and it basically guided the development of philosophy, literature, science, and arts during the age of enlightenment. Community is central. It's a central key institution in Christianity, because the Bible reminds Christians that people are created for each other, and then one should love all fellow humans, your neighbors and your enemies. However, many have argued that Christianity, the Protestants in particular, is an expression of individualism, as man has been created in the image of God. So there's a big focus on self-expression, self-sufficiency, and independence. Despite the critique, a sense of community in Christianity is maintained through regular communal worships, rituals, and symbols. Christianity is also premised on a biblical call for Christians to fulfill their divine purpose to spread the word. So Christian missionaries have taken to this task for centuries and has touched all corners of the earth. The next group that I would like to touch on is called irreligion. It's 16% of the global population falls within this category, and it basically means it's the absence of religion. Many different subtypes. You get many different subtypes, such as atheism, secularism, and agnosticism. So atheism, for example, is a group or belief that denies all religion. It just denies the existence of gods. It is based on a variety of ethical beliefs, ranging from naturalism, where only natural laws apply to the universe, and to humanism, who ranks humans above all else. But these different views do not necessarily comprise religions. They're not necessarily then practiced in the community settings. However, communities are starting to form around this shared non-belief. So what we said before is that a community is formed around a commonality. This is the commonality. Then the fact that they do not believe or that they are not religious is their commonality. The Oasis Network is one such movement in the United States where secular individuals found a like-minded community, and they have regular gatherings and talks and get-togethers. And they call themselves, this is their slogan, a place for the non-religious to come together to celebrate the human experience. So when William Campbell wrote in 1913, he wrote around the popularity of non-believers. He suggested that it is inescapable that humans need to belong to a group. So we need to belong to a group. Doesn't matter our religious or our beliefs. And that people revel in life together with others. They want to celebrate life with others. And they want to act to the good of the whole society. And that is possible for this to occur outside of religion. When we look at African perspectives, Christianity and Islam are the most prominent religions in Africa. So there's 49% Christians and 42% of Africa belongs to the Islam faith. So let's look at, we've already touched on Christianity, so I'm just going to briefly look at the Islam faith, where it's the second largest religion in the world. And it dates back to the 7th century, and it's based on the teaching of Allah, which is their God, through the Prophet Muhammad. Islam is generally seen as a religion that favors society. There's a strong focus on community it favors community above the individual. And much of the Quran, which is their holy book, teachings are devoted to the role of the community in executing Allah's will. So regular gatherings, prayer and congregation and rituals strengthen their sense of community. Yet it is still the individual that will remain answerable to their God. The other group, smaller group in Africa that needs a mention is traditional African religions. There are about 8% of Africa that still practice a variety of traditional religions. They are seen as more than just a tradition of faith, but more as lived traditions. So they're mostly oral traditions, and it's based on oral traditions along generations. There's less focus in these religions on doctrines and much more on rituals and ceremonies and lived ways of being. These religions, they believe in higher or lower orders, gods and spirits. They practice worshipping of the dead. So the ancestors there's a strong link to ancestors. They use magic and they rely on traditional African medicine. Most of these share animism at its core, which is the belief that all objects, places, and living things have a spirit. And they promote peaceful coexistence with each other and with other clans and religious groups, and with nature, most importantly. So one of the traditional African religions that I would like to touch on is the Yoruba ethnic community, and it's a religion of the Yoruba people in parts of Nigeria and West Africa. It is premised on the concept that all humans have a destiny or fate, that everyone must strive to eventually become one in spirit with their divine creator. It also stresses the interconnectedness of people's thoughts and actions with all other living beings. Again, festivals and rituals are important for the community to express their spiritual beliefs and to strengthen the sense of community and to make sure that everybody has enough of what they need, just like in a check-in, to see if everybody is okay. To conclude this section, I would like to revisit two key African concepts or ethics around community beyond religion that is key at present. You've looked at Ubuntu, or the Ubuntu philosophy, which is based on the Zulu proverb, in your lesson with Neil Leroux, and it basically it speaks to I am because we are, and I am a person through other people, and my humanity is tied to others. It's based on the premise of a shared humanness that promotes community through the recognizing and being aware of individual differences and uniquenesses. And it sort of exudes the idea that it's only through working together that one can achieve what is in the best interest of the group and society. But I would also like to introduce you to another African ethic. It's actually called Ukama. It's the Shona ethic, and Shona is the original inhabitants of Zimbabwe. It means relationality or relatedness. And unlike Ubuntu, it says that a person can only be a person in, with, and through not just other people, those who are still alive as well as ancestors, but also in, with, and through the natural environment. So there's a much stronger emphasis on our relationship with nature. Humans are not the masters of nature. Humans are in the center and must live in harmony with the universe. So this ties in and relates to ecocentrism, where humans are seen as equal to all other living beings, and not in contrast to ecocentrism, where man sees himself as higher or more important than other living beings. Nidufurepeni and Shainanga argue that Ukama is a core tenet of the concept of community in Africa, and they see it as a set of interactions and interconnections within the cosmos, rather than an existence that is distinct and individuated. And I believe I would like to end this section with the words of Morovo, which is a Zimbabwean academic, that argues that these two African ethics, Ubuntu and Ukama, is absolutely crucial for the existence of humans on Earth. And I would like to read this paragraph. African ethics, as espoused in the concepts of Ubuntu and Ukama, offers a plausible paradigm that can help the present generation and humanity at large to harmonize its behavior with the natural environment. Through Ukama, an authentic understanding of human existence should embrace human togetherness in all spheres of existence: social, spiritual, economic, and ecological. In Ukama, with all these dimensions of human existence, the individual derives personality and character. As we're nearing the end of the discussion, and I would like to conclude by just briefly looking at two global issues and how what we've said thus far around community and the way we perceive ourselves to be in community, how these are influencing these global issues. The one being the COVID-19 pandemic, and the next one being climate change and sustainability. So when we look at the COVID-19 pandemic, it provides a key example of how the differences in self-orientations, of how you see yourself or perceive yourself to be, and group orientation, whether you're more individualistic or more collectivist, how this orientation are influencing the single most global risk at present. We are, as individuals, through our actions, morally responsible for posing a risk of infection to others. So it's through our deeds that we can negatively impact on the group. So the ultimate goal being a global herd immunity for the benefit of society as a whole. So a group of social scientists argue that culture is also key in giving reasons why the pandemic affects countries differently. So Moravi et al., their research used Hofstede's original country data that we looked at before in earlier slides, and especially the aspect or the element of individualistic versus collectivist and how that rate across countries. And they found a correlation between COVID cases and deaths and the more individualistic countries. You can see here on the graph, the higher the country score, individualistic score, the higher the COVID deaths per million. Countries like Belgium, Italy, France, Netherlands, Great Britain, USA, which all score high on the individualistic scale, also have higher death rates. They also found that a collectivist orientation can be accredited to a preparedness to forego individual needs for the sake of the common good, i.e., if you come from a collectivist society, or you have a personal orientation, your personal orientation is more collectivist, you are there's a willingness to sacrifice personal freedoms for the benefit of the greater good. Another current crisis or global crisis is climate change and unsustainability. And I mean, as you would be aware, that global warming is the result of human action, and it's strongly linked to industrialization, and it is linked to westernized individualistic needs and aspirations. And we can only really, and I mean, being the biggest challenge of humanity that we face as a unit, we can only succeed in the 15 common global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, if we work together in communities. So I would like you to look at this next video clip and try and make out and try and tease out the power of communities and the messaging around how important communities will be and partnerships will be in this global fight against climate change.
We can be.
We must be
the first generation
to end extreme poverty.
The generation
most determined
to fight injustice
and inequalities.
The generation that saves the planet from climate change.
And this is how it will get done.
The global goals.
A 15-year plan
for everyone, everywhere.
With no one left behind.
We will live in a world
where nobody
anywhere lives in extreme poverty.
Where no one
goes hungry.
Where no one wakes in the morning
asking if there will be food today.
We will live in a world where no child has to die
of diseases we know how to cure.
And where proper health care
is a lifelong right for us all.
We will live in a world
where everyone
goes to school.
And education gives us the knowledge
and skills
for a fulfilling life.
We will live in a world where all girls and all women have equal opportunities
to thrive
and be powerful
and safe.
We cannot succeed if half the world is held back.
We will live in a world
where all people can get clean water
and proper toilets
at home, at school, and at work.
We will live in a world where there is sustainable energy for everyone.
Heat, light, and power for the whole planet.
Without destroying the planet.
We will live in a world where economies prosper.
And new wealth
leads to decent jobs
for everyone.
And we will live in a world
where our industry,
our infrastructure, and our
best innovations
are not just used to make money, but to make all our lives better.
We will live in a world
where prejudices and extremes of inequality
are defeated
inside our countries
and between different countries.
Where people live in cities and communities
that are safe, progressive,
and support everyone who lives there.
Where we replace
what we consume.
Planet where we put back what we take out of the earth.
We live in a world that is decisively rolling back the threat of climate
change.
Where we restore and protect the life in our oceans and seas.
We'll restore and protect
life on land,
the forests,
animals, the earth itself.
With peace between and inside countries.
Where all governments are open.
And answer to us for what they do at home and abroad.
And the justice rules.
With everyone equal before the law.
Where all countries and we their people
work together
in partnerships of all kinds
to make these goals a reality for everyone, everywhere.
These are the United Nations global goals
for sustainable development.
Let's get to work. Let's make it happen.
So we're nearing the end of this lecture, and I've just jotted down a few questions to guide your reflection for your vlog, and you can look at these if you want, and it's basically just imploring you to look at and reflect on your own personal orientation, whether you see yourself as more individualistic or more collectivist. How do you see yourself in your communities? And whether these are communities of place or relational communities. How do your social networks communities influence your individual behavior and vice versa? And what is your relationship with nature and other living things? And then lastly, would you agree that African ethics, Ubuntu and Akama, is essential for achieving these Sustainable Development Goals? And if so, why? And then just for a fun design exercise, I would like you to go back to, I will also put the link, I'll send you the link for Leo's pictograms and his reflection on Eastern versus Western cultures. And I would challenge you, to design a set of graphics to complement his work to show the African perspective. So how would Africans cue? How would Africans approach problems? And how would Africans see authority? Thank you very much. I hope that was valuable and that you found some inspiring bits in there to reflect on. Thank you. Bye.